All right, welcome. In this briefing, we're conducting an after-action analysis of the final phase of the Vizcaya Campaign. We'll be focusing specifically on the pursuit operations that took place from the 22nd of June to the 8th of July, 1937. Let's get started. Now, before we dive in, it's crucial to credit our source. All the material and the excellent operational maps you're about to see come directly from the meticulous research done by Colonel F. J. Victor Rodrigo as part of the Battalia's Guerra Civil project. Here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll establish the proper doctrinal context for the operation. Second, we'll assess the condition of the opposing forces right after Bilbao's fall. Then we'll get into the specifics of the operations, looking at the two distinct sectors, north and south of the Cadagua River, and finally we'll wrap up with the results and the stabilization of the new front. Okay, Section 1, Doctrinal Context. It's absolutely critical that we correctly define this phase of the campaign. What we're looking at here is a deliberate, methodical advance, a pursuit, not a rapid exploitation. You know, in military doctrine, these terms have very precise meanings. An exploitation is when you break contact with the main enemy force to rapidly punch deep and seize key ground for future ops. A pursuit, on the other hand, is all about one thing, the destruction of that retreating enemy force. And this operation was, by definition, a pursuit. And that brings us to the key point here. The Nationalist advance wasn't some kind of high-speed blitz. It was methodical, advancing town by town, with security as the #1 priority. This deliberate pace was really dictated by logistical realities, especially a shortage of transport. All right, moving on to Section 2, Opposing Forces. Let's assess the state of both sides right after the fall of Bilbao. And really, you couldn't find two armies in more contrasting conditions. This map shows you the situation on June 19th. With Bilbao gone, the Basque Army Corps is in a state of near total chaos, scrambling to form a new defensive line to the west. As we'll see, this line was never going to hold. It's really a tale of two armies. On one side, the Basque Army Corps was experiencing a complete systemic collapse. Morale was shot, desertions were skyrocketing, and political friction was boiling over. Many Basque nationalist units just didn't see the point in fighting outside their home territory. On the other side, the Nationalist brigades, yeah, they were logistically constrained, but their morale was high and their combat effectiveness was superior, allowing them to dictate the terms of the fight. So put yourself in the shoes of the Basque commander, General Gamier. He's facing three massive problems at the same time. One, his units are literally disintegrating. Two, he has to rebuild his entire command structure on the fly. And three, he's got to somehow establish a coherent defensive line with exhausted, demoralized troops. His initial plan, which you see here, fell apart almost as soon as it was conceived. And if you need any proof of just how severe that collapse was, look at this. This report from June 23rd is absolutely stark. The complete defection of 5 battalions wasn't just a loss of troops. It was a tactical catastrophe that handed over a critical defensive line without a single shot being fired. By June 25th, they were in desperation mode, attempting one final reorganization to stop the bleeding. Colonel Vidal takes command of the Army Corps. They actually had to dissolve 5 brigades just to find men to reinforce the others. And the whole force was restructured into 6 new divisions. This was really an attempt to create some kind of order out of absolute chaos. Okay, Section 3. Let's get into the operational execution, starting with the northern axis of the advance. This push went right through the industrial and mining heartland of Vizcaya. The overall plan was actually pretty straightforward. The battlefield was effectively cut in two by the Cadagua River, which created 2 distinct zones of action. So 3 brigades were tasked to the northern sector, and 2 were sent to the south. The advance in the north was chronological and methodical. It kicks off on the 22nd with the VI Brigade taking San Salvador del Valle. By the 24th, key coastal and mining towns like Santurce and Galarta are in their hands. The advance keeps rolling west, with the 2nd Brigade reaching the Mercadillo River by the 30th, and it all culminates with the capture of the Castro Alain Massif on July 5th, where they started to face some stiffening resistance. And these two maps side by side really tell the story of the pace. Look at the left. That's the progress in the first 4 days. Now look to the right for the next 5. You see that? It's a steady, deliberate movement. They are securing territory step by step, not making some kind of deep, risky penetration. In the final stage of this northern operation, the Flechas Negras Brigade comes in to relieve the VI Brigade. They push across the Barbadune River on July 2nd and make a final, bold thrust to the town of Anton. That basically marks the limit of the advance in this sector. So that covers the north. Now for Section 4. Let's shift our focus to the operations south of the Catagua. Here, the terrain was more agricultural and mountainous, which of course presented a whole different set of tactical challenges. South of the river, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Brigades were conducting a much more complex series of maneuvers. The IV Brigade's mission was to clear Llodio and Amorio early on to secure that vital Bilbao-Burgos road. It then pushed west, taking Zala and Valmaseda by June 29th. At the same time, the 5th Brigade was executing a deep advance on the far southern flank, capturing Arciniega and pressing west to protect the main effort's flank. And that brings us to our final section, the conclusion. Here, we'll analyze the end of the campaign and take a look at the strategic situation on the newly established Vizcayan front. You know, this comparison gives you the clearest possible summary of the operation's success. On the left, there's the line as it stood on June 19th, right after Bilbao fell. And on the right, that's the final line they reached by July 8th. The entire province of Vizcaya had been effectively secured, a major strategic gain. So here is the final order of battle. You've got the Flechas Negras, along with the I, 3, and 6 Brigades holding the new front line. Meanwhile, the I and 4th Brigades were pulled back into a second line to act as a reserve. At this point, the front was stable. The war in Vizcaya was over. But, and this is a big but, continuing the advance towards Santander was not going to be simple. It required a significant operational pause and a complete redeployment of forces. And as this map shows, the road network was the big limiting factor. There were only 2 main roads, one coastal and one inland, that could support a major offensive, and they were not aligned with where the forces were currently positioned. So, let's summarize the key strategic takeaways from all of this. First, the Basque Army's collapse was systemic. It was driven by a crisis in morale and political division, not just a simple military failure. Second, the Nationalist advance was a textbook pursuit, methodical and heavily dependent on logistics, not a rapid exploitation. Third, the Catagua River was a critical geographic feature that basically split the battlefield in two. And finally, the campaign was a clear success. It achieved its objective, secured Vizcaya, and perfectly set the stage for the next major offensive on Santander. And we'll conclude with a strategic question for you to consider. Given the deliberate, logistics-heavy nature of this pursuit, what doctrinal or operational adjustments would be required to maintain momentum during the upcoming offensive into the far more rugged and challenging mountain terrain of Santander? That concludes this briefing.